My family has been greatly impacted by the disease of Alzheimer's. So my grandma Rosemary, who is my mom's mom, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 8, 9 years ago. And she had two brothers who also suffered from Alzheimer's. And her mother, so my great grandma Alma, had suffered with Alzheimer's for almost 22 to 25 years, thereabouts. So we've had quite a few family members with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is a disease of the brain, so it's a form of dementia, and dementia is a general term for memory loss. So for somebody with Alzheimer's that's just first starting to be diagnosed, they might forget things here and there, mild forgetfulness. But as the disease gets worse and as the person lives with Alzheimer's, their memory can completely disappear. They lose the ability to talk, communicate, and also to take care of themselves on a daily basis. As I said, Alzheimer's is a disease of the brain. So kind of to put it in, the simplest terms possible, what happens is the brain cells develop little deposits of protein and fibers on the brain, and therefore they're not able to send messages and signals through the brain properly. So it's all kind of jumbled up and confused, and then that person loses memory and loses the ability to do those steps of their daily lives. Alzheimer's has been shown to be a disease that is passed down in families. So when my great grandma Alma had Alzheimer's, we, kind of had an inkling that some of her children would have Alzheimer's, and it's a good possibility that my mother and even myself and my sisters could someday have Alzheimer's. So we kept an eye out for it. For my grandma Rosemary, the very first sign was that she had a drastic change in personality. So to give you a little background, my grandma Rosemary was the most patient, kind, loving person. She loved to sing in the choir, she gardened, she was a cook at the school, so every time we went over she had just piles of food, some of our favorite recipes. And one of my first memories of knowing something just wasn't right was watching my grandma make one of the recipes that she had made 100 times before. She didn't follow a recipe because it was in her mind, but she got confused and she didn't know what to put in next and what the ingredients were, how much to put in. And usually she would have laughed it off, no big deal, found a recipe, but this time she took the bowl and just threw it across the kitchen. And we had then talked about how she definitely was changing her personality. So that kind, patient person was getting really easily frustrated, and she just wasn't acting like herself. So with those signs, we took her to the doctor. My grandpa verged doing most of that, and they said the possibility of having Alzheimer's or dementia was very high. Just taking care of herself really was the hardest part for her. So if you think about your brain, our brains do every little thing for us every day. So let's think for a second when you wake up. Right away when you wake up, your brain helps you know where you are, what day it is, whether you have to get ready for school, or if it's a Saturday you can sleep in. Well, my grandma's brain did not help her out that way anymore. So she would wake up confused where she was, who my grandpa was, what she was supposed to do. And then even finding rooms in her house was difficult. So finding her way into the bathroom or into the kitchen to get herself ready became very difficult. It was a challenge for my grandma herself, but it was definitely a challenge for my grandpa, who was her caregiver, who took care of her. So he got to the point where he really wasn't able to leave her alone. And if he did, he had to have somebody kind of come in and watch her and things like that. So with Alzheimer's disease, not only is the person who is suffering from it going through changes, but the people around that person also have to adjust their daily life. They really have to take care of that person and watch them. We all were a big part of helping out with my grandpa and grandma, so it's affected me by just watching my grandma go through those changes. So seeing her change and helping her adjust and move into a home and all of those things, it definitely affected me. Watching my mom, that's her mother, so she loves her, and it was hard to watch her change, has definitely impacted myself. But there are also some positives that I have gotten from watching somebody go through this. So definitely one of the things that I have taken away from this, and one of the ways it's affected my life, is to look at the general population. So anybody I see in the mall or in the restaurant, I look at them very differently. Alzheimer's usually affects people in the older generation. So, sometimes when you see somebody out in public and they're doing something that's a little bit funny, or you might, some people might wonder what's happening. I now have a different way of looking at that. I always want to think about how I can be respectful to those people. I never really question why somebody is doing something anymore, because we do not know what they're struggling with. To give an example, that was one of the things that my grandma really struggled with. We still wanted to go to restaurants, and she still wanted to go to the mall and get out in the public, but when we did that, she didn't quite remember how to act or how to talk with people. And there were a lot of people that would look at her in a different way, and you could see them judging her. And it's because they didn't understand what she was going through. So I don't blame them. But that's one of the things I take away from this, is that if somebody, even a neighbor or a friend out in the community, sees me and they might not remember who I am. I don't make a joke anymore and say, "What, I just saw you last week. Don't you remember me?" I now kind of take a step back and say, "My name is Shelby. I live down the street." I might introduce my parents so that they can connect who I am. And just really think about how I'm talking to somebody, just in case they're suffering with Alzheimer's or something like that. For my grandma, it was probably worse right away in the beginning. When she started to realize she was forgetting appointments or forgetting what day it was, that was probably when she realized she didn't want to admit she had Alzheimer's, but yet she knew her life was changing and there's nothing she could really do about it. So for my grandma, that was probably the toughest part. Sitting outside of it, though, and watching it happen, I'd say the toughest part for me was watching my grandpa, who was a caregiver, and my mom, who helped take care of her as well. Because it's tough not to get emotional about that. You have to remember that that's the person you've known for so long, and then you watch them change their personality and forget certain memories. And at one point, usually with somebody who has Alzheimer's, they even forget who the people are around them. So one specific example that pops into my mind is my grandma lost a lot of her recent memories, which is typical of Alzheimer's, but she continued to remember things from her childhood. So she knew she had a daughter, my mom, but in her mind, that daughter was still a little girl. So she didn't recognize my mom as an adult and didn't want her around. That was really tough to watch. But at the same time, it was really good to listen to my grandma's stories from when she was little, because those were so fresh in her mind. Those were the things that she could remember. And I had learned things that I had never heard about before. There's a lot of things that I wish everybody would know. First things first is that Alzheimer's is on an incline, meaning that more and more people are diagnosed every year. I believe the fact they've now said is one person is diagnosed every 67 seconds with Alzheimer's. So that means that we, as the general public, are able to just walk around our communities in a very different light. I think my grandma worked really hard her whole life to teach being kind and respectful, and that's the one thing I would want everybody else to know about Alzheimer's, is we never know what people are dealing with, whether it's Alzheimer's or something else, but just to treat anybody you see out in the public with a very kind and respectful attitude. Little things that we all can do if we know somebody who has Alzheimer's. For instance, my grandma would repeat the same question over and over, or would say the same comment, 10, 12 times in one sitting. And at first we tried to correct her. "Grandma, you already said that, or you already asked that," which would just cause her to get frustrated. So one little tip is, if you do have somebody who has Alzheimer's that is repeating those questions, just answer them back, or say a response to that same comment. Sometimes my grandma would say things that were very wrong and incorrect, but I learned really quickly, don't even correct her, just agree with it. And then it didn't really matter for her understanding, so she would stay relaxed, and it didn't get her escalated or into a frustrated state. Okay. Studies have shown that if you keep your brain working and practicing, it's able to kind of postpone the effects of dementia and Alzheimer's. So little things like brain puzzles, crossword puzzles, Sudokus. A lot of our phones or iPads have apps that are little brain puzzles. And I know my mom even does those every night. She has fun playing a couple games, they seem like, but really they're challenging her brain to keep it working. I've also heard a lot of people on the discussion of Alzheimer's talk about how somebody who admits they have it and combats it with a positive attitude is going to maybe make it a little bit longer without showing those signs and effects. To compare, my grandma Rosemary, she didn't want to admit it. She didn't want anybody to know about it. And she definitely went downhill a little bit faster, and we could see the difference in the way that her friends and community treated her because she didn't tell them. Her brother, who would be my great uncle Ed, he admitted it. So the first thing he would tell people is, I suffer from memory loss. My name is Ed. Who are you? Give them a chance to introduce themselves, and every single day he was doing little things to help his brain continue remembering the steps. Even when he had suffered with it for 10 to 12 years, he had made himself a little board with nails and screws in it, so every morning he'd get up and put the nails in the board and take them out, screw in and screw out, because he was in construction his whole life, and that's something that he really wanted to hang on to. So just keeping your brain working, little puzzles, trying new things, and remembering those steps, repeating those steps are definitely things that can help keep our brains fresh.
Oh, that's great advice. That's good words of wisdom. Now, I just want to make this clarification. So you're not talking about Call of Duty or those kinds of video games.
No, definitely not. These are a little bit different kind of games that are more challenging, like those Sudoku puzzles. I know the one that my mom plays a lot is a little train that has a certain color, and it moves to colored depots, and then she has to really be quick on which she gets the colored train to what area. So they're more of a puzzle. You have to solve a puzzle to get an end result.
Great, thank you.